Welcome back. Trump administration sweeping tariffs on our three biggest trading partners, Canada, Mexico, and China, set to go in effect tomorrow. I want to bring in David Wessel for analysis. He is Senior Fellow for Economic Studies at the Brookings Institution, someone I've known for a long time and admired each and every year I've known him. David, this is no longer theoretical. Stock traders and economic analysts and others were saying, oh, Trump talks a big game, but it's not really going to happen, or it won't happen to the effect he promises. It sounds like it's going to.
That's absolutely right. I mean, we still don't know the details. Exactly what are these tariffs going to apply to? Is it everything? What is his objective here? It's very unusual to say we're going to use tariffs to get you to stop sending fentanyl precursors or people to the United States. So I think a lot of people are thinking, yeah, he's going to impose these tariffs and he's going to try and make a deal. On the other hand, we know that Mexico and Canada and perhaps even China are going to retaliate. So that's going to complicate things and may make life difficult for our exporters. He's trying to reduce our imports, but remember, we export about 11% of GDP, and that's going to be affected if these countries impose tariffs on our exports.
And David, as I looked at the numbers, let's just deal with Mexico for a second. $129 billion last year in autos or auto parts trade with Mexico. 50% of U.S. auto parts come to the United States either from Mexico or Canada. That's just one sector of the economy. People will feel this.
Right. Absolutely. So the auto industry is very integrated across Canada and Mexico. So one question is the president really going to impose these tariffs on parts that are going back and forth to U.S. plants? Because that's going to be really disruptive, or will he not? The other thing is we import a lot of fruit and vegetables from Mexico, and we don't have domestic suppliers in the winter who can supply those. So people are going to see an increase in prices. I don't think it's going to be an enormous increase in the inflation rate. That'll be small. We only import about 15% of GDP. But in specific sectors, this is going to be a real effect. And I expect Democrats are going to be calling attention every time a price goes up. They're going to blame it all on President Trump, and we'll see how he handles that.
And David, let's talk about energy. As I understand it, Canada is the largest supplier of U.S. energy imports on an annual basis. 1.4 billion barrels of crude oil, 60% of our total imports last year came from Canada.
Right, but remember, the U.S. now produces more than enough oil to meet its own needs. So we are now an oil exporter. The president seems to think that if by making, it's kind of weird because on one hand, he wants to lower oil prices, but that's going to have less incentive for U.S. producers to drill. On the other hand, he wants to raise prices, apparently, by taxing these imports, which will make it more attractive for American producers to drill. So it's very confusing. But again, it can only help increase prices, and that's not what he ran on. So this is going to be really interesting over the next few weeks.
And David, what is your expectation based on what you've been reading, what you've been reporting, what you've been analyzing about the likely response from Canada, Mexico, China?
I'm absolutely certain that Canada and Mexico will respond with compensatory tariffs. Whether they also make an offer to him to do something on immigration and fentanyl remains to be seen. And I expect the same is true in the Chinese. I think the Chinese really hope they can make a deal with President Trump. They think he's very transactional, and they're trying to find a way to defuse the thing. But I think they won't be afraid to block exports of things that we need from China, because we are dependent on China for a number of rare earths and stuff like that. And someday we may be domestic producers, but we're not yet.
And I have to believe, David, and I'd like your thoughts on this, that Canada and Mexico might reasonably say, Mr. President, not only are we your geographic neighbors, our economies are integrated, as you indicated, David, but if you're talking about fentanyl or trade deficits, China is the much bigger problem. Much larger trade deficit, U.S. to China, than it has with Canada or Mexico. And fentanyl comes through Mexico to the United States, but it originates many times in China. And yet China is getting the lesser of these tariffs to come.
Absolutely. And don't forget, we have a trade agreement, the USMCA trade agreement that President Trump negotiated. He took an old treaty and made it, but he said better. And so we have this pact with them, and he's tearing it up. And you're absolutely right. If our enemy is China, why are we going bigger tariffs on Mexico and Canada? And why are we spending all this time talking about DEI as if DEI was the one that was eroding American jobs? It's really, really hard to figure out what the strategy is here.
We had gremlins galore in David Wessel's Zoom. That's not his fault or our fault. It's just gremlins. They exist. They complicated the video just a little bit. David Wessel, thanks for being with us. Hope to see you again.
Thank you very much.